My top 10 favorite Beach Boys songs. You know, spring is kind of round the corner. It's one of the first kind of sunny days this year here in Vienna, Austria, and when it's getting sunnier and warmer, one tends to think of the Beach Boys. So this is my top 10 list. Let's start with it. Number 10 is Breakaway from 1969. Curiously enough, written by Brian Wilson with his father Murray. That's a song where Murray Wilson is the co-songwriter, but he wrote it under the pseudonym Reggie Dunbar for whatever reason. So Brian's father helped out with the lyrics on this song, and it's a wonderful song. It was just a single. It wasn't on an album. I think it stemmed from the Sunflower recording sessions. And Sunflower is probably my favorite Beach Boys album, you know, not Pet Sounds. Sunflower is, I guess, my favorite Beach Boys album. And this was also recorded during the sessions and didn't even make the album. So the album could have been even better for me if they would have included that. So, in my opinion, a very underrated period in the Beach Boys career. And you know, we have a recurring trend here. We've started with the first song, co-songwriters. You know, I'm one. You know, there's two Beach Boys myths where I'm not really kind of a follower. You know, I like the Beach Boys, and in some phases I would say I'm a fan, but I'm more of a casual fan, a casual listener. I'm not one of those hardcore fans, and I'm not one who buys into that Brian Wilson, the big genius and Pet Sounds. You know, the album that encapsulates that. You know, first of all, like I said, Pet Sounds isn't even my favorite Beach Boys album, and secondly, you know, he was always reliant on co-songwriters. Also in the studio, he was a kind of a good or very good, innovative bass player, at least innovative of course, but technically I don't think he was one of the top-notch bass players of his day, and so. Musically in the studio, he was just more like an arranger, I would say. And as a songwriter, he was always reliant on co-songwriters, mostly for the lyrics. He wasn't a very good lyricist. And you know, much of the quality of those big Beach Boys songs comes from the lyrics. You know, from those angsty subjects that get tackled in those songs. You know, it's the songs wouldn't be half as good with obviously not very good Brian Wilson lyrics. There are examples when he wrote the lyrics, and it's usually more nursery rhyme kind of writing. And so I think he's one of the best songwriters from America from his period, 60s, 70s, but I don't think he's like one of the top 5 biggest pop songwriters or pop geniuses of all time, like most Beach Boy hardcore fans seem to think. But Breakaway, great song, great melody, but also great lyrics. You know, that are countering kind of the euphoric vibe of the hook lines and the music. There are those bittersweet, melancholic lyrics to that song, which is often what a great Beach Boys song will be like. Number 9 is All I Want to Do. This time it's Brian Wilson with his cousin Mike Love, and that's also something in the Beach Boys saga. You know, the hardcore fans always tend to think that Brian's father Murray and his cousin Mike, those are the bad guys, the villains in the story. Maybe they're not the nicest kind of people, but you know, I think it was also always like a tactic by the Brian Wilson fans and maybe by Brian Wilson himself to make him even more genius and the good guy. That's every fault of Mike, and there's certainly lots of faults about that we could talk about regarding his father. But you know, they were really important to the song. Well, Murray wasn't really important to the songwriting. Breakaway was just an exception to the rule. But Mike Love, for example, especially in the early phase, in the early to mid 60s, was very important. And initially, many of those songs were only credited to Brian. They were credited words and music Brian Wilson, and Mike really had to sue him, had to sue his cousin to get the credits in the end. All I Want to Do, great song. I've seen videos and I read that the shoegazing scene and chill wave and witch house and those kind of artists, ambient artists, think that this is a great song. And yeah, they're right. It's a great song. And I think it's, funnily enough, because this has nothing to do with chill wave or all those genres I've just talked about, but I think it's the Beach Boys song that sounds the most like an Oasis song for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe the reverb on the vocals. Maybe that's it. Number 8 is really a deep cut. It's At My Window. It's a song written by Al Jardine and Brian Wilson. Again, Brian Wilson didn't write those songs on his own. I think all of my top 10 songs, there's no single song. We'll see. That's 100% Brian Wilson penned. And this is more like an Al Jardine song, I would say. And it's a great song. It's not one of those. There are two kind of Beach Boys classics. There's the melancholic, more sad songs, and there's of course the Surfing USA kind of upbeats party songs. I'm more leaning towards the more melancholic songs, and At My Window is one of the best and most overlooked of those melancholic Beach Boys songs. Number 7 isn't overlooked. It's one of the biggest classics, not just by the Beach Boys, but probably of the 60s. It's Don't Worry Baby, fantastic song. This time a guy called Roger Christian was the co-writer, the lyricist of that song. 1964, fantastic song. Number 6 is probably the biggest classic on the complete list. It's God Only Knows from Pet Sounds. I think it's the only song from Pet Sounds on this list. I really, I don't want to come across like I'm dissing Pet Sounds. It's just not my favorite Beach Boys album, but of course it's a masterpiece, and I love many songs from Pet Sounds. The usual suspects like Wouldn't It Be Nice. Also, I just wasn't made for these times, for example. But my favorite song of that album is God Only Knows. Famously, Paul McCartney once called it his favorite song, his most favorite song of all time. And again, that gets blown up by Beach Boys fans who claim that Brian Wilson was in the same league as Paul McCartney as a songwriter. But there's 10 other interviews with Paul McCartney where his favorite song is a different song. There's like 10 times Paul McCartney said in an interview what his favorite song is, and it's 10 different songs basically. But on one occasion, he called God Only Knows his favorite song, and I can see why. It's a brilliant, again, one of those melancholic songs. Number 5 is again an overlooked gem. It's Deirdre from Sunflower, and this time it's also co-written by Brian Wilson, but the predominance, the big songwriting contribution of the song comes from Bruce Johnston. Sorry, Bruce Johnston mainly wrote this song, and it's a fantastic song, especially showcasing the vocal harmonies of the Beach Boys, which of course was one of their biggest assets. And it's a fantastic mood. I think it's the song that encapsulates the mood of my favorite album, Sunflower, my favorite Beach Boys album, the best. It's this very smooth, folky, hippie kind of meets barbershop quartet Beach Boys sound kind of song. Next song is again a big classic from 1965, and I think it must have been the first Beach Boys song I ever listened to or ever was aware of. It's Help Me Rhonda from early 1965. I was aware of that song already by the age of 4 or 5, I would say, maybe even before I became aware of the Beatles, or before the Beatles became my favorite band, because we in the household, my parents, guess it was more my father than my mother, had the 7-inch. I still have the 7-inch. I inherited it from my father. So we always had the 1965 original single, and I always loved that song. There are 2 versions of that song, and of course, my favorite version is the version that I listened to when I first got exposed to that song, the 7-inch version. The other version is also fine, but I really like that. And it's one of the first, no, it's not one of the first, I would say it's the first Beach Boys song where sonic experimentation starts. It's what must have been one of the first songs in pop history, and especially for mainstream pop music, with an outro, with a 4 outro, when the song fades out and then fades back in again, like Helter Skelter by the Beatles 3 years later. This must have been one of the first examples for that, and it started the phase of the Beach Boys experimenting. So again, that's a myth from the other side. It's not a myth by Beach Boys hardcore fans, that's more like a myth by Beatle hardcore fans, where they always say the Beach Boys were inspired by the Beatles to start experimenting. But on Help Me Rhonda, they started even before the Beatles started with those kinds of experiments. Well, maybe 8 days a week, a couple of months before Help Me Rhonda, also had a kind of a sonic trickery in the outro and the intro. But Help Me Rhonda was really the first of those Helter Skelter kind of outro songs. So I have to give that to the Beach Boys. Number 3, okay, this is only a Brian Wilson song, credited only to Brian Wilson. So in that sense, it's my favorite Brian Wilson, pure Brian Wilson song. Till I Die from 1971's Surf's Up album. Of those melancholic, sad, almost depressing sounding Beach Boys songs. That's my favorite. It's the second to last song on the album, and the last song is the title track, Surf's Up. I think this is one of the best endings to any album in pop history. Those two songs, to me, they're always interconnected, and Surf's Up would be another honorable mention for me. But Till I Die is my favorite song from that album, and it's one of the last really, really great Brian Wilson songs. After that, I think his mental health and also his songwriting capabilities, went downhill rapidly, unfortunately. Number 2, therefore, isn't a song with any involvement that I know of Brian Wilson as a songwriter. It's El Jardine. Again, we had which song? I think At My Window was also co-written by El Jardine. He didn't write many songs, not even co-wrote many songs by the Beach Boys, but he had 2 in the top 10, and he had my number 2, which he also wrote with some co-writer, but someone who wasn't in the Beach Boys. I've forgotten the name. El Jardine wrote the song he recorded and released it in 1979. So it's a very late. It's the most recent song on today's list, Lady Linda. Fantastic song. I even prefer the live version of that song that's on YouTube, when the Beach Boys perform it in the late 70s, early 80s at Knapworth. Check that out on YouTube. It's a fantastic live version, and really, it seems, even when you look at it, at the live version, you also see that it must have meant a lot to El Jardine, this song. It really sounds very heartfelt and soulful. Those lyrics about separation, I think he went through a divorce at the time, and probably his wife's name was Linda, I guess so. And it's, one of my favorite breakup songs, I would say. Number 1, again, a big classic, and this is one of those early to mid-60s Brian Wilson, Mike Love co-songwrites. Guess Mike Love first and foremost wrote the lyrics to it, and again, like I said in the beginning, I think lyrics are a very important part of a song. So it's the songwriting duo Wilson Love that's the genius behind that song. But before that, my honorable mention, I've mentioned a couple of songs like Wouldn't It Be Nice, or I Just Was Made for These Times, and others. But if I had one honorable mention, it's Kokomo. And again, that's a song that Brian Wilson hardcore fans will hate, and it's a phase that Brian Wilson and Beach Boy myth fans hate, because it's the phase when they left Brian Wilson behind and became that nostalgic act, just singing their old songs and relying on outside songwriters. This song was, I think, written or co-written by Terry Melcher, who was also very involved in the Charlie Manson thing. Beach Boys had lots of connections with the Charlie Manson stuff, and this is also one of those connections, because some of the Manson murders happened in a house that Terry Melcher owned in the 60s. He's the son of Doris Day, and he wrote or co-wrote Kokomo, and many people hate it because it's that kind of selling out Beach Boys phase. But just listen to the song for what it is, for the song itself. It's a brilliant written 80s pop song, and if you don't believe me, just listen to the version, for a B-side. I think Ben Queller or Adam Green. There's a B-side, I think it's from an Adam Green single, the anti-folk, indie folk artist Adam Green, who used to be in the Moldy Peaches. He had a single, and the B-side was a cover of Adam Green together with Ben Queller, another indie folk artist, and they're covering Kokomo, and they're covering it as a stripped down folk or indie folk song, and it's brilliant. So the song itself is a great song, and also the version of the Beach Boys, which is very different from the stripped down version, which is very 80s sounding. I think it's a great 80s pop song. The harmonies are awesome, and I don't see what's wrong with the song. But that's just the honorable mention. Would be very shocking if this would really be my number one. But I wanted to give this song a bit, this really cool song, a bit of cred by doing that. But my number one song, I've talked about it before, so I'll make it quick. California Girls. California Girls, the big classic California Girls from 1965. My favorite Beach Boys song, and I would say maybe one of my top 10 favorite pop songs of the 1960s. Thank you very much for watching. Till next time. Goodbye.